want to bring up our moderator for the evening, Mike Teixeira. Please come on up, and the rest of the panel, and take it away.
Great. Hi, everyone.
Yeah, if you guys want this.
How are you all doing today? Good? All right, we got a second here while we set up. My name's Mike Teixeira. I'll be your moderator today. I come from a company called DEC. And I think the Mad Max title to this is very appropriate. How many of you have seen a Mad Max movie? Yeah, and the minute you look at it, the thing that strikes you is the mess of technology you see. You see boom boxes bolted on cars. You see weird hardware pasted on people's faces. And not only that, it seems like every group you visit in Mad Max, they all got their different agendas. They're all going after something different. What better metaphor than Mad Max to talk about the state of mobile entertainment today? So that's what we're going to go into today, and these experts up here today are going to try to give you thoughts about how you can navigate your way through this industry, how you can create entertainment in this industry, and things that maybe you haven't considered, that may be insights that you can build upon a little later. I want to thank the Wireless Tech Forum for having us up here, and the sponsors, of course. I'll tell you a little bit more about myself later, but I want to get to this panel right here. So we're just going to go right down the line here and just tell us your name, what company you're from. You can tell us your title, but I really want to know what that means.
Great. I'll start here. I'm David
Great.
Reed, Vice President at an agency called If Then. We're about 66%, about two-thirds media, a third really corporate, so from Nat Geo to Coca-Cola. And then I'm a strategic advisor at a really interesting video engagement platform. It sort of merges forums with video, gives you a layer of conversation on top of any video called OnCue.
Hi, I'm Ben Warlick. I'm a technology attorney at Morris, Manning & Martin. My background is computer and electrical engineering, and my practice is intellectual property litigation and emerging technologies like artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, and autonomous vehicles.
Good evening. My name is Meg Ryan. I'm the Vice President of Marketing Strategy for the Atlanta Hawks and Phillips Arena. I don't actually know how to describe what I do because I'm literally the catch-all for everything inside the arena. So everything from content production. I have a show of hands of who follows us on social. Anyone? Just humor me if you don't. No, I'm kidding. So I build content for that. Also mobile, direct response, advertising, and promotions.
My name is Joshua Sommer. I'm the Executive Director in charge of New Growth Strategy and Business Development for Cox Communications, which is obviously a service provider, a cable company out here in the U.S. What new growth and development really means is so I get to work on all the fun new innovative technology. So I'm looking for that next $100 billion or $100 million in annual revenue for the company. And so also in regards to mobile entertainment, I was one of the original product managers for Media Flow. And so first broadcast over wireless. And so traditionally been a wireless engineer, moved into the cable space, and have been in the video space lately. So.
Great, thank you very much. A little more about myself. I worked for a couple of decades in PR and marketing, running creative teams, and actually creating content. I actually engaged in a lot of this Mad Max activity. The name of the game in inbound marketing is to make your content seem legit and not tied to a sponsor and creating that fake news that people are following. Got a little burnt out on that and decided that the company's leadership was disengaging because there's so many marketing channels out there. But the companies that had leaders who knew how to present and speak well, their marketing teams were on the same page. So I said, aha, that's what I want to do with my next life. I started a firm called DEC, and we specialize just in presentation consulting, coaching, and design. So that's who we are. So let's jump in here, all right? All right, first thing I want to do here, panel, is I want to go kind of round robin here, and I want you to name one entertainment trend in the industry, or an issue, trend or issue, that you think is having the greatest impact on the industry? You can only pick one. All right, David, you want to start us off?
Yeah, I think, one. I think if I want to pick any of them, I think the flood of content, because the barriers to entry for content have gotten so low, that there's a lot of great content being produced. And now that people have a lot of different options, it's really fragmented audiences. So where I made like this specific type of content, I can go find that. So before where you've had it at very large groupings of an audience, now that landscape is really fragmented across.
So kind of the flood and the fragmentation that creates.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yep.
great. Ben, what would you say?
Well, mine's similar to that, but in addition to the fragmentation of content, also the personalization of advertising, because that's really where the money is, the high-value personalized advertising. And you can see the big tech companies like Google and Facebook are already there, and the old line companies, cable companies, media providers are trying to catch up and provide more personalized advertising.
Okay.
So this is probably the first time marketing and legal are on the same page, but I was actually going to say personalization. I think that has to do, obviously, with big data. And a lot of, one of the most interesting things I've heard is we're just now scratching the surface on what data means and how that's going to drive personalization. And in my current role, I have a unique world that I live in where I have to have hyper-local content because of broadcast rights. So there are certain things I can't share beyond the physical walls of my arena, whether it's a concert or if it's a Hawks game. But then I also need to provide additional content to individuals who are outside. But then the NBA did this great thing where they drew a circle around the arena and said you have a 150-mile radius outside of the arena that you can market to, but you can't market past that, and unless you go international. So you have all of these ifs, ands, and buts that I have to figure out how to navigate from a specific location. But then in addition to that, I have to consider, because of fragmentation, how I can then break through the clutter and deliver my content in such a way that makes sense for that end user. But then it's not just delivering, it's also producing and anticipating what that will look like.
Wow. So Meg, your one issue, if you had to sum it up, would you say the fragmentation of the market and how to leverage data to go after them?
Yes, so I basically skirted the system and stole both of their answers.
Yeah, okay. Fair enough.
Go
It's
Meg.
honest, at least. There you go.
So I'll bring it back to that macro trend. So there's a macro trend going on that there's going to be significant growth from a revenue perspective. But back to the point the panelists are making is the fragmentation is distributing that revenue across multiple different means, and it's creating significant problems for people to actually be able to make a business case to get into the space or stay within the space. And so cable as an example, or just a telco as an example, we have subscriber decline that's going on, maybe not as much as the overall ecosystem as a whole, but from a revenue perspective, you're trying to gain as much of that additional share as possible. And so I say from a trend perspective, the fragmentation is creating challenges in monetization for the entire ecosystem.
Right, right. So how to gain market share, how to make a profit with this fragmented environment. Okay, great. Now I want to kind of dig down on those topics, and I want you all to kind of participate in the conversation here. So let's talk a little bit about this flood of content. How have you experienced problems with your own companies with too much content and trying to figure it all out? Anyone can kind of jump in there. Yeah, Josh, go ahead.
The biggest challenge, and it kind of goes back to that last point I was making, is engagement, right? The more content you have, the more relevant content to very specific segments, the harder it is to engage with that audience. And what that does is that has significant impact from an advertising perspective, right? And so if you have less eyeballs on the screen, you're making less money from an advertising perspective. And so the more content actually creates significant challenges.
Right, and I would imagine on the content producing side, it's hard to do the math and figure out how much do you invest on each channel. Would you guys agree with that, or do you run into that problem?
I would actually say my problem is different.
Okay.
Mostly because everybody loves sports. I mean, the top innovator, you're talking about sports, and that's all content that people are passionate about. And so what I work in is very, very different than like a toothpaste or like shoes, just things that people need to have. And so I don't work in a commodity. So people, when they come to me, they want everything that I have to produce. And so for me, the bigger challenge is, where am I serving that content so it can be consumed in an optimal fashion?
Right.
So it has less to do with the amount and just the where.
Okay. Anyone else want to talk about that flood of content and how it impacts them? No? Well, Ben, sure.
Not exactly on that issue, but as far as challenges, as a lawyer, I have to say regulation and legal challenges are the big challenge, especially as we heard last week with the Facebook hearings. There's the AT&T Time Warner merger trial right now. So the challenge is, one, there's the content and personalization, but also trying to keep everything within the legal framework that we have. And I think that there will be some pullback as a result, some changes as a result of Facebook, but I don't see any major fundamental changes.
Okay, let's build off of that topic then. For the other panelists, how are you dealing with the legalities behind privacy? Do you just kind of make stuff and hope it doesn't run across the wrong line?
No, there's a lot. We work with a lot of big brands and big media companies. GDPR is a huge endeavor for anybody that's a global brand, a global company, and there's been a lot of hours working towards becoming GDPR compliant. When you've got 4% of global revenue or $20 million, whichever is larger, as the fine, it tends to get the attention of organizations. And from a legal perspective, you can probably talk a lot deeper in that area. But it's been a lot of rush around how do you balance the data that we get, the data that we sell, right? And how do you monetize that? And how do you technically solve some of the challenges from a legal standpoint that directly conflict with each other? So how do you track that somebody doesn't want to, how do you not track somebody but track them to know that they don't want to be tracked?
Okay, that's an interesting point.
Yeah.
2 follow-up points to that. How are you dealing, Josh, about privacy around the projects that you work on? What are some examples of how you've adapted?
I think overall, just because of the nature of the environment right now, we have to over-index in being more cautious than I think a lot of us would even want to be. So to kind of answer the point, it's all about the value you provide to the consumer, therefore the privacy that they're willing to give up is actually kind of within that balance, right? And so it's a little bit of a conundrum that on both sides. There's certain users that are less interested in privacy. Like myself, I kind of have it all out there and I kind of let it be. And from a value perspective, as long as I'm getting personalized ads, so I'm not getting that ad for some car I'm not interested in at all, right? I'm getting specific things that are of interest to me. That's value for me. But not all users are like that. So right now, as a service provider, I think all of us are having to over-index from a conservative nature just to make sure we kind of follow the lines.
What struck me with the current dust-up around Facebook and how that data was used is I don't think most consumers right now really cared. We figured, okay, our data's being mined. We all know that. It's going to be leveraged for advertising or to sell me something different. I think it was the context of realizing how that data was used on a political scale that really shocked a lot of people. Would you guys agree? How do you think the consumer attitudes are around privacy?
Well, I think
Ben, that's right in your bailiwick. Nope, but Meg, you can jump in if you want.
Well, no, I was actually going to say what's interesting for me, kind of taking a step back, is we have an added layer of what we do from a privacy and security standpoint. Because at the end of the day, I have to monitor, and I would strongly suggest everybody here check your tickets whenever you go into a live event, not just Hawks, not just here in Atlanta, but globally. And there are so many opt-ins and so many things that you are opting into and accepting by entering into a public arena. And so when I position it that way to people, that we're doing full body scans and that we are actively monitoring every single social post that is going on inside our arena, all of that data is 100% being monitored by an individual on my team and an individual on security, on our security staff. And we are actively making decisions on when we should remove someone, if we should shut doors, if we should open doors, if we should shut roads down. And what I've seen from a different side is recently we had an election here for a new mayor, and we were working actively with our previous mayor to look at security and how do you actually build a secure infrastructure around live facilities and live events. And when we position it that way and we start advocating, and the individuals on our team that are working directly with the government, it was amazing how many people were like, well, obviously I want to be safe. Obviously I want somebody monitoring the person next to me to see what they're doing, but I'm not doing anything, so you don't need to monitor me.
Right.
But
it's everybody else who's the problem.
absolutely.
Never me.
And so that's where I'm seeing a lot of the changes now, particularly from an NBA standpoint, where our lawyers are asking, what is that ticket back actually saying, and what are they actually allowing us to monitor? And then when you're walking into an arena, what are we now accepting liability for? And so those are the biggest things that are changing. But it goes all the way up the totem pole. It goes all the way up to your mayor and everybody that's currently in office as well.
Okay. And how about you, Ben? Are you seeing an uptick, given the recent news events, of people proactively, companies, organizations coming to a firm like yours and saying, can you check us on this?
Yeah, I think that is true. It is an issue people are interested in now. Yeah. And one of the issues is just, it's hard to know how things will play out, how things will change. Everyone wants to know where things are going, not just people are generally aware of where things are now and what they have to do, but the other issue is where things are going. And I tend to agree that people, especially in the US, don't really care that much about privacy. They don't seem to care. Sometimes they act like they care, but we don't really know how much they actually care about data privacy. And it's a lot different in the EU. Like an example is Facebook purchased the messaging app WhatsApp a few years ago. And when WhatsApp was purchased, they told everyone, look, don't worry, everything's going to stay the same. Your data's protected. Around 2015, I believe, Facebook decided to start sharing data back and forth between WhatsApp and Facebook. They said to make it easier to find your friends and connect to people. In the US, it didn't really cause much dust up, but in Europe, it was a much different reaction. People were not happy. It triggered some government investigations, and some of the EU states actually said, no, you can't do that. You have to delete all the data that you shared, and you have to get affirmative permission before you share data like that. So it's just sort of a different environment here, and I don't know that people care that much. I think after Facebook, things will probably change a little bit, but at the end of the day, I think companies like Facebook will look more at what the regulations are. They're more concerned about the regulations than people's reactions.
So I want to just add a quick point to that, because I agree with what you're saying. I think there was a big difference with, so I mean, the industry as a whole has been tracking individuals for a long time. And a lot of it has to do with the amount of political spend and advertising that occurs during these election cycles. And so there's significant value in getting return on your investment by targeting specifically to individuals. That make a lot of sense, right? Here's where the challenge was. Rintrack and Nielsen and NBC, CBS, these guys have been providing data out to these political groups for a long time. But they did it aggregated, anonymized. This was the first time where it was Bill Smith equals this political party, therefore target him, don't target him. And so there's a different way. Facebook probably should have went about it slightly differently in regards to kind of aggregating it and maybe providing these 10,000 segments or 20,000 segments, whatever your segmentation looks like, to make this much more digestible.
Good points. All right, so I want to shift gears now to talking about the flood of entertainment and technology. I'm going to start again with you, Josh. What has Cox, for example, been doing to be able to serve on a technology basis the right content to the right audience at the right time?
So a lot of that has to do with enabling multiple screens. You guys have heard that probably over and over again, right? So I'm going to give you a slightly different take on things, more 5-10 years out. So content is becoming much more complicated with immersive type technology, right? Virtual reality, real-time decisioning within advertising, all of these things require a distribution network that really is able to handle high velocity, low latency type solutions. And so one of the things that I think is important for all service providers to do is if this OTT thing is going to take off, and we know it's here to stay, it's taking off, we've got to enable that to capture as much value as we can. And so I'll call it edge computing. It's much more than edge computing, but really driving down and creating these better experiences for Netflixes and for Hulus and for our over-the-top. That's how we're going to actually gain share, right? And so it's all about improving experiences and creating these immersive engagement models.
Okay. Anybody else want to talk about the technology behind serving content and how that hurts or helps you?
Yeah, I think there's, with the fragmentation in the marketplace, not only is there immersive is absolutely key, but you also have now such a audience segmentation of content that you're delivering. I think that a lot of the technology today, like Facebook, has given conversation platforms around that content.
Right.
And I think one of the next phases is really taking that asynchronous viewing, because we used to all watch Seinfeld on Friday night at 8 o'clock. Now people are watching it all across at different times, and now being able to segment that audience and create conversations around the programming and around that content with similar minds is going to be key, I think, to building into the future. Facebook and Facebook's a really big example that have made a lot of media companies ghostwriters and kind of stolen the platform. I think you're going to see a shift back for media companies to really start owning that more. They're going to have to distribute that content out, but they're also going to have to address a lot of different audiences, and you're going to see AI and machine learning playing a big role in how you do that, because it's just too much fragmentation for any team of people to handle.
Right, right. And so it strikes me that, Meg, you have an interesting challenge, because it's kind of the reverse. It's like, how do you leverage technology for the live event, and then how do you leverage it for people watching from devices or from home? What are some of the things your organization is looking into as far as how to enhance the live event?
So I'm very fortunate that I work for the NBA ultimately. And the NBA, for those of you who are not familiar with all the major leagues, you have the NFL, which is very regulated from a broadcast standpoint. I mean, they will tell you the number of times you can post on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook, the day of a game. And for me, I'm thinking, man, I'll just give my phone to John Collins, who is one of our star players, and let him run around and post whatever he wants. Right. If you look at MLB, they have BAM, and so does the NHL. So they've centralized all of their content production as well as distribution. And you have MLS, which is somewhat different, but they're also much younger. And when you look at the age groups that each one of these leagues really targets, you have the NFL, which is kind of selling the shield, so they have somewhat of an older audience, but they have a very specific target audience. Then you have MLB, which has BAM, which is a much, much older audience. And then you have hockey and the NHL, which utilizes that same content distribution with BAM, that they somewhat skew a little bit older as well. And then you have MLS, which is much, much younger, and they're the youngest. The NBA is in the sweet spot where we are kind of living in this millennial type of generation where we skew much younger than the NFL or MLB. And I bring all of this up because the way that we think about a live event is very, very different than all of those other leagues. And the way that we distribute content, capture content, is radically different. For example, we have in-stadium replays. You can sit in your seat, and if you're in stadium, you get unique camera views. You have opportunities to see from the coach's bench, from the scorer's table, and that's only exclusively inside the arena. And there's an individual on my team who real-time is tagging players because they have RFID chips in their new uniforms. So we are real-time tagging individuals as they're playing. So you could literally sit there and say, I want to see Steph Curry's shot, and you can literally watch all of Steph Curry's replays if you're in arena. And that's because the way the NBA proactively thought about content distribution, and the way that you augment the fan experience inside the arena, because ultimately, I need somebody to come to the arena. But outside of that 150-mile radius, I also know that it's not realistic to think about an individual coming to every single game. So for the past 3 years, outside of market, you can have a VR experience. You can put on a headset, and you can actually watch a game, and it's live streamed, and it's automatically output into VR. So the idea behind that was we actually put behind that a subscription model, similar to like a Netflix or any of your other subscription type of viewing platforms. And what we've done is we've said, as long as you're outside of market, I know that you're probably not going to come to a game, but you know what? You can put that headset on and you can watch it and consume my product all day long, because we have a value, because we are tagging them, we are looking at their data, so we know how valuable they are to us. Right. And they're spending and advocating for us in other ways. So we're giving them that in-game experience, even though they could be anywhere in the world.
Wow, it's amazing to think that people could be in the same row witnessing completely different versions of the game. That's pretty amazing stuff. Now let's talk about net neutrality. Whether it's here to stay, whether it's going to disappear, much debate. How do you think the industry is adjusting or planning in this atmosphere?
Well, I'll give some background on that, so I'm the lawyer. And then everyone might take a different view, so we can argue about it.
Yes.
But so the net neutrality provisions that were in place by the FCC were put in place by the Obama administration several years ago. Basically says no blocking content, no throttling content, no paid prioritization, which means treating certain content with some priority. And that went into effect several years ago. Once the Trump administration came, the FCC announced an intent to reconsider that, and the final order went into effect, or the final order was in place in January. It actually goes into effect on Monday. So on Monday, the internet is no longer neutral. And the issues behind that are, the issues that people ask about are, is it really a big deal? Is it really something we need to worry about? What's going to happen? I mean, the industry has said, we're not going to do any of these horrible things like make you pay an extra $5 if you want to access Facebook, or $5 if you want HBO Go on your phone. But we do think it's an issue, because what happens is, particularly on the paid prioritization, is probably coming. And it's sort of like an internet fast lane that's set aside. And if the service providers, broadband providers, set aside 1 or 2 lanes as this internet fast lane, guaranteed high traffic, especially during congested periods, well, it's sort of like a highway. If there's toll lanes set aside, the other lanes are going to slow down a little bit. So is everything going to freeze up on Monday? No, but it's going to affect everyone at the margin. And there was a good comment that I saw by an executive at Etsy, which is the online marketplace, and she said, like I said, it's not going to freeze up, but if the smaller companies, if their traffic is a little slower, then they're going to lose some business to the bigger companies. And in the aggregate, that's going to cause some less smaller companies growing. It's going to harm their growth in the aggregate. So that's what our clients are concerned about. And we think it is an issue, and it's important. It's, as I said, it will go into effect on Monday, but there's still a lot of legal wrangling at the federal level. Some states are enacting their own net neutrality provisions, so we'll see whether those will be preempted by the federal legislation. That's the background, and yeah.
So don't panic yet, but the changes will be gradual.
Right.
Right. Anyone have any other thoughts on how net neutrality will impact the industry? Crickets. No?
No, I've got obviously a lot of thoughts on this.
I knew you did, Josh.
I mean, first and foremost, obviously, the open internet is a very, very important thing, and I think as a company, Cox Communications is a huge advocate for it. We currently do not block, we do not throttle, we do not provide any different types of experiences that would hinder the consumer's experience overall. But I will give one example here. Okay, so I'm going to take my Cox hat off here, and I'm going to put my wireless engineer, my engineering hat on. This is probably unfair to do to Ben, but so there's the actual network that we serve, and then there's the legacy internet that exists since the 90s. And for all of you that know, our pipes, all these service provider pipes are not the problem anymore. They're so big, they're so robust that from an experience perspective, they're pumping significant amounts of data at any given time. The challenge with the experience, especially from a latency perspective, is coming from the BGP and TCP routing that goes on with the actual internet. And this is stuff that we do not control. These are routers and systems that are incredibly old. That's literally, I'm trying to get to Seattle on AWS, and I'm just opening my application in Atlanta. It's going to route me to New York. It's going to then do a circle around Ohio and then end up in Seattle. And it's going to take significant amount of time because it does least-based cost routing. It's broken. And so what service providers are going to do is service providers are going to overlay that. They're going to fix that. That has cost. That cost has to be accounted for. And therefore, we may provide different services to accelerate certain types of services. But it's important to remember that we're solving problems. We're not necessarily prioritizing certain traffic over others. And we will give consumers that choice so they're able to choose what they want accelerated and what they don't want accelerated, right? So there's a big difference there.
Okay, thank you, Josh. Appreciate that. New topic, fact and fiction. That seems to be difficult to discern these days. I made a crack about it earlier. What can we as an industry, what can the wireless industry do to help consumers decide what's real and what's not? Crickets, anyone? David, your company is dealing with live discussions while content is being served up, correct?
Yeah, so
Is there a way to leverage the intelligence of the network?
When you're talking about what's real and what's not, are you talking about what's fake news versus, are you talking specifically about fake news?
Yeah, it could be fake news. Sometimes it's branded content that doesn't look like branded content. You know, it could be.
Yeah, I mean, I think, so to a large degree, I think the audiences are a lot smarter than we give them credit for, but I also think that audiences are, you'll be shocked a lot of times at what a certain percentage of the audience is going to fall for. So there are technologies. There's a well-funded venture-backed company that we were working with on the if-then side, on the agency side, that's really doing a lot of analysis using artificial intelligence to help differentiate this out. And the fact is, the barriers to entry for creating content are so low today that anybody can create content. They don't have to adhere to journalistic standards. The typical standards of advertising don't apply. It's really cutting into legitimate sources of content, right. Because this stuff can just be created and published out. So that is a big issue. I think people will continue to get smarter and smarter and smarter, and you can start to sense this and people start to pick up on this. But I also think that there's some regulation that's probably going to go, it's definitely going to go into place. I think as native advertising becomes a much larger component of the advertising revenues in the world, there's going to be some rules around that are going to be established. So I see the industry evolving into a place where they're going to have swim lanes kind of set up for different types of advertising. You're always going to have some bad actors. Right now there's a lot of bad actors, right. And that's going to get narrowed down over time.
So do you see a future where there are penalties in place for serving up fake content? Do any of you think that that
Well, I
might
think
happen?
that artificial intelligence and machine learning is going to pick a lot of that stuff off before it gets there. But then what's it picking off, what's it not? It's hard to say where it's going to go, and it's too early to tell, but I definitely think that content's going to get scrutinized more and more, and people are going to get smarter about it, and companies are going to get smarter about it, and particularly the networks and service providers are going to get a lot smarter about it.
Faith in humanity and the technology coming together.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
bad actors are still going to play.
Right,
It's going to be
right.
a battle.
All right, so my next question is about how you as professionals make decisions around budgets when fragmentation is happening, who's going to be watching or not watching is going to be a question mark. How are you making budgetary decisions on what to invest in and what not to invest in? Want to start, Meg?
Sure. So we are renovating our building right now. So this is incredibly topical for us. For those of you who have been to Phillips Arena, when you go in, if you went in this season and you were there previously, it looked like it was under construction because, quite frankly, we had torn out walls. We removed a lot of concrete. It was barely operational. And during that time frame, we were really trying to figure out what is the best fan-forward experience that we can create. And fan-forward for us is not just the live event that you're consuming inside the arena, but it's also when you're kind of in the guts of the building and experiencing it, how can you continue to consume our product? And then further than that, how are you consuming our product outside of the arena? And that's teasing you to bring you inside the arena. So from that standpoint, I can say that as we were building out and coming up with new ways to rethink a live entertainment experience, the first thing we thought of was content. So how are we going to build an infrastructure that allows us to create and collect content? And it's interesting for me to think about the question that you just answered, because for us, in some ways, we live on fake news. Right. Sports, I mean, everybody's talking about, before our GM left last season, who the next GM was, why did he leave? Our coach is now interviewing. Why is he interviewing? Is he actually interviewing? And people are putting that news out there before I know about it. And that's the best part about it. But I want to create an infrastructure that enables that conversation to happen in real time. So for us, and for those of you who have been there, I'll apologize proactively, but our wireless infrastructure in there, our Wi-Fi is horrific. And we know it, we're fixing it, and that is part of the ripping the concrete out of the building and then actually rebuilding from the bottom up. That was step one. So that was a massive, massive expense for us. The next thing was our content team. Our content team almost tripled in size. So from a manpower standpoint, we have more people now that are building content on the fly for every single different type of channel. The next piece is our analytics team increased as well, because for us to actually prove out the ROI on all of these investments, we need people who are answering those really tough questions, not just who's in the arena and who's consuming our content, but how is the Atlanta market shifting so that we're removing a lot of that guesswork and we actually can tactically say, like, this is the person who I am reaching, this is the person that I want to come inside the building, and when they come inside the building, here's my expected return on advertising for that person. So I know your value theoretically before you come in the building, so I can proactively provide an experience that is on par with what your investment will be from a lifetime standpoint. But for us, we are actively looking at data, and we're not making decisions without kind of looking forward 3 years, 5 years, 10 years down the road. But then we're also, and that's really how we're prioritizing. But again, the content for us was really the biggest shift. When you're taking a team from just a handful of people and tripling that in size, that shows a fundamental shift. And that wasn't just here in Atlanta, that was from an NBA standpoint.
So from your organization standpoint, without a doubt, more content equals more people viewing, and so you're going to invest in any opportunity where you can increase your content production.
Yes, and
Okay.
mostly because we have, our revenue stream is not just based on a ticket buyer. We have a multitude of people who are coming to us from a corporate partnership standpoint. So you talk about native advertising. I love native advertising. My job 90% of the time is trying to figure out how do I hide a sponsor in there and like subliminally sell somebody else
Right.
through my brand halo. And it works in sports because people are passionate about it. So I can get away with stuff that most people don't have the opportunity to if you have a different product.
All right.
Let me hit on
Sure.
this, because I'll play this a little different, because I think what Meg is saying, and if Turner was here too, I think they would say something similar. So what you're hearing is a significant amount of attempt coming from a content producer, publisher, to reach consumers in different ways and ensure from a value perspective that they are optimizing the content that they're distributing, right? All of that has direct impact to the question in regards to budget. All of that has direct impact on the cable provider, the integrator, the aggregator that's bringing that to the homes. And so when you have specific content that has rules over it to protect your home field advantage, those rules are passed down to us. When you have a direct-to-consumer play, those are eyeballs that are taken away from us, right? And so from a budget, trying to make a business case perspective, the content provider is asking for more money to be able to provide the content to you, because now they're creating more value. They're taking share away from you. And we've got a subscriber decline that is actually fairly significant. And so creating a business case, to your point,
Right.
is incredibly challenging, right? A lot of the time we make bets just to make bets because the business case is not going to work out, right? And so we sit there and we talk about churn. You know, how do we stop subscribers declining? Well, a lot of that is the content providers, who I love and are dear to us. They're challenging the ecosystem by not necessarily flexing to this new fragmented model.
Right. And how about models out there where they're producing the content but then gating it?
That's where I think you see, back to the Time Warner AT&T deal, these vertically integrated companies are trying to capture as much of that dollar on that multi-screen approach as they can. It makes total sense, right? That dollar now is distributed to Netflix, it's distributed to the cable operator, it's distributed to, you know, the actual direct-to-consumer platform, right? And so it's split amongst 3 different people. So if I own all 3, then I capture that back and I'm back to net zero, right?
Right.
But the more it's fragmented, the challenge it is. And so that's where Time Warner and AT&T, even Comcast and NBC went.
Okay, thank you, panel. Any last thoughts on that topic before I switch?
Yeah, I think on one comment around, I think you thrive on fake news, and I think that's rumor and supposition that comes out and conversations around that. Really, where I think that's going to get stamped out, and service providers have to stamp it out, and brands going to have to stamp it out, is pirate broadcasts, direct-to-consumer stuff that looks like it's coming from the Hawks. That stuff's so easy to produce right now, and it floods a lot of the market channels around there. So
What I think is really interesting about that, though, is
Not to interrupt,
Oh.
Meg. I just want you to make this last point, then we got to switch over to the audience, so go ahead. Sorry.
the big thing here is that if we would be fooling ourselves if we thought that we knew everything about content development and distribution. We are barely scratching the surface. And if you think back even 2 years ago, last year, or even 5 years ago, the channels that we have that we consider to be the most mature are in their barely infancy stage. So everything that we're discussing now could be radically different tomorrow based on net neutrality or on different ways of distributing content, or how we're choosing to use or embed new technology into a mobile device. So everything that we're saying, I think, is absolutely poignant now, but then even tomorrow it's going to be radically different. And I mean, everything is like that now, and it's being driven by technology and technology evolution, whether it is data collection and automation, or if it's even content development and distribution. And to me, that's the most interesting part, is everybody now, there's no baseline right now. Everything is just growing at such different rates that the way I experience a lot of these issues versus anybody else up here is going to be 100% different based on the type of product that I inherently have, and the fact that I have a live event, that I'm also a content producer as well as a distributor on a regular basis.
Thank you, Meg. That was a great kind of end cap, I think. Get used to change. You're all in flux, and we're all part of this Mad Max world together. All right, now it's your turn to ask questions. The way this is going to work is raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question. I have to repeat the question for the folks at home, and then our panel will answer it, all right? So no cheating, panel. Wait till I repeat the question. Anyone have a question? Okay, the question is, Josh, specifically aimed at you, but then the rest of the panel can jump in. What do you think the role of net neutrality will be for the upcoming technologies like 5G?
So first, if the regulation is done correctly and Title II is not necessarily assigned to it, and there's some other means of regulating this, what it will enable is the free form of access networks just in general, right? And so back to your HETNet point, I actually think that if regulation is done right, our heterogeneous networks are really going to become to fruition, and you stop thinking about wireless versus wireline versus Wi-Fi versus this. It just becomes seamless, right? So I think that's first and foremost. In regards to 5G, I think it drives to 5G because of the additional services that are going to be able to be created. 5G is great because of its real-time nature, right? Back to the edge computing component that I was talking about earlier, 5G is an enabler for very rich services. And so I think net neutrality can enable that. It also, if done incorrectly, like it was done before, will directly hinder that. And so if you tie to the point where service providers need to go into the FCC for approval to do something, all of a sudden now I'm going to pick a specific technology, I'm going to be incredibly thorough with that technology, and the heterogeneous network and that seamless network goes away. And so I think that's a great question.
Great, thank you. You feel like your question was answered? Great. Next up. Basically, it's a question about how to anticipate regulations, because something that seems okay today, tomorrow all of a sudden out of a new context is completely not okay. Ben, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I think the Cambridge, the real details of the Cambridge, I don't know all the details. I think some of it is contractual, and Facebook says that it was improper. I guess Cambridge Analytical was saying it wasn't improper, but some of it seems like the primary issue was that the consumers who were interacting with the system didn't really understand or weren't really told correctly what Cambridge Analytical was actually going to do with the data. And I think that's one of the things that that's what Congress was really hitting Mark Zuckerberg with last week, is that the privacy policies are much too complex. People don't really understand it. And even if Facebook had acted properly or even if all that had been disclosed properly, it still isn't really clear to the end user exactly how their data is going to be used. So I think if there is a regulatory push, it will be on more transparency, trying to get more transparency out there, trying to find ways so that consumers can understand better how their data is being used.
Can you talk a little bit, build on that a little bit, or anyone on the panel, about how you encourage simplicity? Is that the key? Because it seems to me on the schoolyard, if you say to someone, please don't tell anybody this, they're either going to tell people or not tell somebody. They don't come at you with a long list of caveats that say, well, I'll tell people on a Tuesday when it's rainy, but not on a Thursday. You know, is there a drive towards simpler privacy statements?
There was a good comment by, I think it was one of the senators at the hearing. He said to Mark Zuckerberg, your privacy policy sucks. And he had it in front of him, and it's just too complicated.
Right.
And I don't really know what the solution is. I think it's really a user interface issue, and that might be something you could understand or you could speak to, is how do you communicate with people? How do you show them visually? And Facebook is actually pretty good at this. If you open up their privacy policies, I think they actually have a fair amount of information there. But it's complicated.
Yeah.
There may be some disagreement in the audience about that.
I mean, one thing that we're doing, and so we have obviously what's legal from, I mean, just from a regulation standpoint, but then we also have to think about the NBA and all the other constituents and all of our partners and all of their additional personal regulations as well. So what you're saying is actually what we are going to start enacting moving forward is as we start to identify new ways and new technologies are available and we have ways to reach you as a customer, we're actually physically showing you inside an app, for example, when new technologies are available, we're actually saying you have to opt in to this specific thing. So whether it's an example of that would be like location. That was big years ago, but we physically show you the benefit to having it on, but allow you to turn it off before any of that's available. Your microphones being on is another one. Wait times, linger times, which are actually slightly different than your location. All of those things we actually show you as you're getting served the actual tactical benefit and the output of that technology. So we are actually trying to show people and individually opt them into the new technology so that they don't feel like they don't understand what the privacy policy is saying. We're actually showing them and they're physically opting into every single thing.
Okay, so rolling it out gradually as it's happening, giving consumers a context.
Absolutely, and I think we have to do that now because technology is evolving so quickly that what the privacy policy covered yesterday is not going to work tomorrow, and we would be constantly rewriting and republishing new apps to be able to function as a business.
Right, okay, thanks, Meg. Any more questions? In addition to 5G, what are some upcoming technologies that you're really excited about that have the potential to impact the customers on the greatest scale? Is that close enough? Yeah, okay.
I mean, for me, it's going to be artificial intelligence and computer learning. I mean, there's just so much information that's coming in right now that there's no way that anybody can sit back and actually make any sort of sense of it in a real-time fashion.
Okay. Josh, do you have any thoughts?
Testing. All right. I'm trying to think of something that hasn't really been discussed, right? So, I mean, obviously, edge computing, 5G, and the immersive experiences with virtual reality and augmented reality. Above and beyond that, I don't know if it's necessarily a technology, but I think what I'll call this product integration is going to occur overall that is going to create these unique experiences where, let's just call it your energy, your education, all of these things will be integrated into a single pane of glass as an experience, right? I think that's a little far-fetched and out there, but I do think there's this big trend going on across the wireless industry and the wireline industry that is all about taking these integrated experiences from multiple different types of companies, whether it be utility or whatever, and create single experiences across all panes of glass. So I think we've stated the significant ones that are coming, so if I'm going to stretch a little bit, I think that's the stretch.
Okay, great.
Can I just speak to that quickly?
Sure.
So one issue is not just the technology, but also who controls the technology, because that has the potential to really disrupt business models, is if the wrong person controls the technology that you're trying to get onto. And so if you want to see what the next generation is, a good place to look is Apple and Google, because they've been historically pretty good at predicting where people's eyes are going to be. And Google, for example, is getting into smart cars, autonomous vehicles, because they really think people are going to spend a lot of time in those cars watching media. And another area is smart Internet of Things, smart watches, smart devices around the home. I don't know if that'll be a big area for mobile because the screens are small. But as things move to new ecosystems, you have to look at who's going to control those ecosystems. It could be another situation like the mobile devices that are controlled by Apple and Google, and what effect that has on the industry.
Okay, thanks, Ben. Did you have a point?
Yeah, I think we're going to be moving into a place where you've got a conversation with other people, like-minded people, with machines, with all different types of technology. I think it's really about the conversation. I think the future is going to become very conversational around video content, text content, audio content. The content is really interesting, but it's the conversation that happens around that content that makes content interesting, that differentiates content. It's talking about The Walking Dead. It's talking about net neutrality. The conversations are what's really, really important. Things like 5G are going to be able to let those conversations live around those content, around all different types of content, and follow you from system to system, from network to network. So I think really the future is and enabling that conversation that lives and goes along the content. When you put content out, its relevance starts to drop, the conversation keeps it going. And I think that's where I see the future going.
Right. Are we leaving, I heard this in your question too, are we leaving certain folks behind as we speed up? Yeah, are we leaving most folks behind while we're building all these cutting edge technologies? Anyone want to talk about how your company or you think the industry is addressing that?
I think to a large degree, we're leaving less and less people behind. I think it's becoming more accessible for everyone. I mean, from cell phones. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Is he also an AT&T customer?
Oh, there's some throwing down.
I know.
It's not in my contract to break up fights, by the way, so.
Let me try and answer this, right? So I think what you're saying is 100% true about 5 years ago. 5 years ago, for the service providers, all of the investment was in speed, right? And so what we found out was, you know what, sending a pipe to the home, it's pretty easy, but the experiences in regards to actually connecting to Wi-Fi is a critical thing that we were leaving completely out, right? We said we dropped it to the modem, we care about the modem, and that's it. About 5 years ago, that changed fundamentally, right? And so now what you see, if you follow X-Fi with Comcast, you follow panoramic Wi-Fi with Cox, it is a whole home Wi-Fi that we ensure the experiences wall to wall, if not outside your home. Where you need it, you have that connectivity. If you need to onboard a device, we now support you with onboarding those devices. And so that's why I say I think what you're saying was 100% accurate about 5 years ago. And then we evolved, we listened to the consumers, we changed the way, because you can't just sell speed anymore. People don't just want speed, because they can get a gig from AT&T, they can get a gig from Comcast, and so what? But it's the experiences in the home in regards to onboarding new devices, even parental controls and managing who can get access at what times. These are new things that are developing over the last 2 years, and I think it fundamentally changed the way we provide access. And I think the convergence that's going to happen with CBRS that we're talking about, now cable companies are going to provide wireless service that'll easily onboard you and then bring in the heavy guns with a Wi-Fi unit or do a combined gateway. These are all things that are going to bring these heterogeneous networks to fruition that are going to be critical to provide services on top of.
So the answer is hang in there, it's getting better. We're all going to be on board the wireless train. That's it for today. I want to thank our panel, and thank you.